All right. So I know this is the last talk of the day. There's no more coffee left. I bought the last Celsius in the vending machine. So hopefully you can stay awake. But trust me, we'll be in this together. So super excited to talk about this stuff and to present it because I am very passionate about it. I really like being able to talk at this kind of more technical level in these types of conferences too, instead of staying at like the higher level. But don't worry, there's lots of pictures, there's colors, there's graphs. So it's for everyone. So I'm going to talk about a open source tool that I built that extends on top of BloodHound. And if you don't know what BloodHound is, don't worry, we'll get to that point too. All right. So what we're going to cover are some expectations of things that you'll be able to learn in this talk, a little bit about myself, what red teaming is, and thankfully, you know, if you saw Jason's talk, you are going to really kind of figure out like how that lines up with what he was saying and how we deliver value through things like red teaming. We're going to talk about what legacy SSO was in Active Directory and then modern IDP through identity providers, hunting for SaaS information, targeting and looting, a little bit of a demo, and then some defensive perspectives as well. So as far as expectations for today, we are going to be talking about identity. And, you know, identity used to be the really fun big word before AI came and stole all the thunder. And I'm not talking about AI today because I'm sure you hear about AI everywhere all the time. So hopefully this is a nice change of pace from just AI only conversations. This particular talk and this tool is really about post-compromise and post-escalation actions on objectives. And what's really important about this is that, sure, you can get domain admin, but domain admin means nothing if it doesn't affect the business. Sure, you have that potential to affect the business, to stop operations, to prevent money from being generated, but did you actually do the thing or not? Because there can be additional controls that even stop domain admins from being able to stop the business conducting operations. So what we're really focusing on is moving through that post-escalation, post-compromise scenario to show the actual actions on objectives that are expected through red teaming work. BloodHound is used to really help visualize what this data looks like and find those paths that lead to these scenarios. And we are extending what BloodHound does today so that we can focus on some more of this identity information that's stored inside of profiles instead of just Active Directory itself. So this will be a little bit of technical items, and please don't be afraid to ask questions. I did this presentation last week in Australia as a part of the AusCert conference. We were out there for the International Cybersecurity Competition, and that was us coming in second place overall with the US Cyber team. So, thank you. Yeah, we came first in Jeopardy. It was very close to coming in first overall, but super proud of the team. We had a wonderful time competing in both the attack defense on the first day and then the Jeopardy CTF on the second day. So, I did the same talk last week, and I did it in 30 minutes. So being able to do it in, you know, like 45, 50 minutes this week is going to be a lot more comfortable so that we can really talk through some of these things a little more. But please, if you have questions, raise your hand. We can answer them as we're going through this stuff. So a little about myself. My name is Chris Haller. I'm a principal security consultant at Omada Technologies. I work out of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I've been there for a little over a year now, really love it. It's been absolutely phenomenal. I'm actually from Cape Elizabeth. Don't hold it against me, all right? I know what you're thinking. I did 11 years with the Navy, 8 of those were active duty, 3 in the reserves. 4 of those years I was doing sysadmin work, and then another 4 years I was doing incident response work at the Navy Cyber Defense Operations Command. And what we did there was respond to any classified or unclassified computer incident on Navy networks globally. It was a ton of fun. I learned a lot. Glad I don't do it anymore because it was really stressful work. But it was honestly super rewarding. It was my first chance to get into cyber, and I really, really loved being able to do that. Way too many certifications. But the one I'm the most proud of is GSE as GX Security Expert number 329. Love doing CTFs, love competing in them, building them, helping to run them. So it's really rewarding to be able to get into that technical aspect, and then also help train and teach other people how to do these technical things as well. Got 30-something CVEs, way too many of those. And I'm also a coach for the US Cyber team. So what we do is go compete in international competitions on behalf of the US. We do a lot of training and also kind of career development as well for young professionals getting into cyber and helping them compete in cyber competitions as well. I've been doing offensive security full-time for about 5 years or so. Did about 2 years of CTI before I pivoted straight into offensive security. And I find it, really rewarding, personally, professionally, to help organizations understand and fix, these real-life problems before bad people find them and exploit them. So I've got a passion for practical approaches over theory. And that is specifically because you can do anything in theory, right? But when you actually show that this is a problem and you can prove that something actually happens or could be used to weaponize against someone, then you can't ignore it or say that it's not possible, or all these other things, right? Like, you can guess someone's SSH private key in theory, right? You totally could do that if you just guess all 2048 bits. Is it realistic? Probably not. But you could do it in theory. So, realistically, we have to focus on the things that are actually going to be the most likely and the most damaging that is going to affect a customer, and then prove why. I had this up earlier, so this is the US Cyber Open CTF. It's going to be starting in about a week or two. If you are interested in US Cyber team and US Cyber games, please take a look at this. Just a quick shout out. This is free and open to everyone. The more people that we get to compete and learn and get exposed to the program, the better. All right, so getting into some of the talk stuff itself, looking at red teaming, we're gonna kind of introduce what this concept is if you're not too familiar with it. The real idea behind red teaming is that we are objective driven, and that is what separates red teaming from pen testing. Pen testing is really focusing on how many vulnerabilities exist, and can we prove what these vulnerabilities actually do, and if they're actually a risk to the business or not. Whereas red teaming, we are, objective driven. We're not just getting domain admin. We are proving access to critical business data, critical business processes, things that actually cost the business money or prevent them from conducting their primary mission operations. So all of this focuses back into how do we make the blue team better? How do we protect everyone more gooder? And what things do we actually do that, create that protection for the organization? And because of this, everything is really outcome focused. So again, just because you have domain admin doesn't mean that you've achieved the objective. Did you actually do the thing? Get access to the database? Did you actually prove you could read those PHI, PII records? Did you actually prove access to the HMI that could affect whatever PLC is being used on the operations plant? So with that as well, it's also important to understand that you might not necessarily need domain admin to get to that point either. If there's a way to laterally move or just go directly to the objective without getting that escalated access first, why not do that? That's a threat. The objective isn't get domain admin. The objective is see if you can access the HMI. So, Active Directory, everyone's favorite topic, right? Who's old enough to be around to have actually set up Active Directory? Few hands. All right. Who has never used Active Directory? It's okay. Don't be shy. All right, we got a few hands. Awesome. So Active Directory by itself, back in the dark ages, right? Like totally monolithic SSO. The whole idea is that it was hosted entirely on site. Absolutely everything was connected to it. All organizational systems used it for that single sign-on. And so that included, ERP, HR, finance, intellectual property, source code, like literally everything is tied back into Active Directory. And this is way back in the days where all the servers were hardware and you only paid once for a license too, right? So it's fantastic for what it does. And at the same time, you have the sysadmins who are, building the network, configuring the servers, running the VPNs. They're the ones that are responsible for security and setting up all of that. And, honestly, security back in those days, 10, 15 years ago, was a secondary responsibility because the primary responsibility is getting the network up, getting the operations running, and making sure those are consistent. And then if you have time, try and do some security on top. So what that meant was that any kind of compromise was completely catastrophic if you only had Active Directory running some kind of identity SSO, right? So when Active Directory is the single source of truth to access all of your critical lines of business, if someone gets domain admin there, it's completely game over at that point, right? They have access to pivot into anything and everything that they're really interested in. So all of that, really comes down to just don't screw it up, right? And then you'll be fine. And anyone knows what this image is? We got a few, right? So it's the, oh man, what is it called? Like Devil's something, what was that? Demon Core, yes, yep. So as long as those two pieces are separated from the, it's like some atomic plutonium, it prevents the critical reaction. And as soon as you remove that screwdriver, it goes supercritical and, absolutely lethal radiation over you. So as long as you don't drop it, then you're fine, right? So, but yeah, like the real idea is that if you control AD, you control everything back in these days. So, why bother getting around all of the locks when you're the locksmith if you control Active Directory in this point? So being able to run this, you can actually go into and get access to all the core intellectual property, payment processing, you name it. Objective achieved. We've proven everything at this point. And it's also important to understand that domain admin is not really like the objective as much as it's a means to get to the objective, which is why it's used and prioritized so much in these ways. Being able to get to DA allows you to get to that fastest path of the core intellectual property or just get right into everything because you own all of the key locks at that point. You have everything. Nowadays, how much critical business operations are still connected to just AD? Way, way less, right? All of these vendors are going into the cloud. They're getting sassy. Some of them are just entirely in the cloud, and they don't offer any kind of on-site operations anymore at all. So what this means is that all of the identity and authentication protocols go through a cloud-based identity provider. And that means that if you compromise on-site AD, sure, there might be a hybrid identity, but even then, like the authentication and the identity itself might not let you go directly into that SaaS-based service. Like you're gonna have to go through the cloud provider at that point and get those cookies or something along those lines. And this isn't to say that Active Directory isn't important, that it's not around anymore. It's still very, very much alive. I don't think Microsoft is ever going to kill it. But all of these
other systems moving into the cloud from the red team perspective means that we have to prioritize and reshift how we are looking for this information to try and get access to those objectives. So let's say our objective as red teamers is to try and gain access to some kind of payroll SaaS HR system that's hosted in the cloud. You know, some kind of website, yeah, that like, let's say ADP, Gusto, you know, one of these other websites, right? Gaining access to Active Directory and finding out who's in the HR groups, like, sure, that's great. You got domain admin, but that doesn't let you log on to adp.com with the HR user's information. You could try and crack their password. You could try to log in with their password, right? Might work, might not, who knows? But you know, it's really hard to do that in that deterministic or very confident way of proving access through just the domain admin at this time. So, you know, that's not to say that domain admin doesn't matter as much as we have to change how we're continuing to achieve objectives or prove access or train how we are gaining that access and protecting systems by validating that these systems are being protected properly. So, you know, now if we gain access to Active Directory, we still have to go through, MFA, you know, some kind of conditional access policies, app roles that go through the cloud IDPs now. And what's really interesting too is that, like, hey, some websites might not even use an IDP. It might just be a username and password that is used to log into the SSO, or I'm sorry, not the SSO, the HR payroll app, right? So there's nothing in the SSO about the identity for that. And at that point, you're gonna have to try and find, okay, where are the browser credentials being saved? And that's only saved on one specific machine too. So, you know, what we need to figure out is how do we translate this domain admin from, you know, just the one-click path to everything to figuring out how do we get to that actual identity material that's stored on the profiles for the machines into that cloud access for the SaaS applications. Any questions so far? Nothing? All right, we'll keep moving. Sweet. So, like, the real problem is, how do we do this at scale, right? Because now that all of these user profiles that we see with that kind of identity information, the browser credentials that are being saved to the profile, some kind of API keys or cloud, you know, authentication material that gets saved locally, PowerShell logs, you know, PuTTY keys, SSH keys, Notepad++ files, like all of these things are stored on the profile itself on that machine. And it's hard to figure out, okay, which machines have which files, which ones have which users. How do we do this without setting off EDR? Because we're trying to like look at everything at once. And, you know, in an environment where there's 3,000 or something computers, like, you can't do that by hand, right? Which ones do we prioritize? Why do we look at them that way? So what we need to do is try and find that local identity material at scale. And, you know, a lot of that is the user profiles do store that browser information. So when you log onto a website and it asks you, hey, do you want to save this information for later? And you click yes, it gets stored in that user profile in your DP API, which is the data protection API for Microsoft Windows. That's saved on your profile on that specific machine. The good news is that, you know, those profiles are persistent and they are durable. So that means that you don't have to be logged in for us to find that information as red teamers. And it means that as long as the machine is on, we can just remote in and grab it. This also means that if we find the right machine that a user is using for like some SaaS application, then we have that trusted device. And we can do that MFA bypass. We can find the long-term session cookies that are used to authenticate to these applications. And then we can also look for, hey, they probably have some kind of cloud configuration or API keys or, whatever kind of activity, or even, now that we know what their primary machine is, we can pivot directly through their machine. And then that looks even less suspicious if, we're accessing some kind of SaaS application that is scoped down to very specific machines as well. So all of this really kind of boils down to finding the daily driver machine that a specific target is using, and then that lets us focus on how we achieve objectives to go to that point. So I know that was a lot too. We're going to get into BloodHound itself. And the really fun thing is that BloodHound is used to help visualize the complexities of relationships within Active Directory. And if you know anything about Active Directory, it's that it is notoriously complex. And complexity is always the enemy of security. So what we can do with this tool, developed by SpectreOps, is it allows us to actually graph out and visualize what these relationships look like. And then we can see, okay, with these misconfigurations, it's possible for someone to bounce around and gain access to a specific location, or to escalate, or to get some level of access that they may or may not should be having. What's really great is that BloodHound is open source, so anyone can pull it down, start using it. You can use it today. And they do have an enterprise offering available for BloodHound as well, which really helps track and maintain ways to protect and defend against these types of identity attacks. So if you're interested in getting started on using BloodHound Community Edition, I have a Medium article that I wrote, I think about 2 years ago, on getting started on it. But the really important part about, and the magic behind BloodHound is, we can actually visually see what these misconfigurations are now. Before, it was so difficult to really understand, like, okay, we have GPOs, they're linked to some specific spot in the OU, and then there might be some users within the OU. And like, sure, you can talk about that, but it's hard to really see, like, oh, okay, Samwell Tarley has that write ability on this GPO, which is linked to the domain that contains the users group where the domain admins group is in. So now we can really clearly see, well, if he can, modify that GPO, it gets applied to the domain admins group. So we can just change something to execute specific code, or take some action. But by having that GPO linked and the inheritance to the domain admins group, it is a escalation vector for Samwell Tarley to pivot and escalate inside of the domain. Being able to see this is way easier to talk about why it's a problem, right? Because you can visually see it instead of just trying to describe what the problem is. Now, what's really cool too is that we can have this has session edge. And what that means is that these are actual live logins on a machine. These are live sessions, live TGTs that exist on these machines, and it shows that a user is actually logged in currently. What's great is that if we see this during this collection, that means, hey, this is probably a good chance there's some kind of identity material that this user has on this machine because they're logged into it, right? There's a good chance could be that daily driver that they use. But the problem is that if they're not logged in, we don't get any of that visibility. So if it is that user's primary machine and they're not logged in, we have no visibility that, like, hey, this is associated with that identity or not. So before we talk about ProfileHound that I built specifically, I want to talk about Open Graph, which was released, I think, in version 8 of BloodHound Community Edition. This extends BloodHound natively in the perspective that it allows you to create another set of JSON that can link directly with the existing users, machines, GPOs, everything inside of the original vanilla information that gets gathered by BloodHound. And then it allows you to build new edges, new nodes, all this really cool stuff. And before in the past, you had to like create a fork of BloodHound or like install some crazy extension, and then you got like diverging paths of all the code bases. It was just like a total headache. But being able to actually do this natively really extends and accelerates how much you can do with this stuff and visualize it in that manner. So there's a lot of really creative ways to graph really brand new, interesting information, like binary imports or like where SSH keys have access to and how. GitLab, GitHub permissions, like run zero. There's amazing ways to like really pull this data back together. Do we have a question back there? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. So, I mean, really anything you can graph with this schema now. It's unbelievable. So, I don't want to say it would be trivial, but I don't think it would be terribly difficult to parse the ACLs of a shared drive and then get that information graphed. I think there actually is one that may exist already. I want to say it's close to ShareHound, something like that, but I did borrow some of the code I used to write this from one of those libraries, actually. But yeah, like to your point, like, I mean, amazing, right? If you're able to visualize who's got access and where they have access and where it might inherit from, like, that is where there's a ton of value in being able to, like, actually reduce problems. So, great question. All right, so getting into actual ProfileHound itself, I built this because I don't like repetition. Computers are really, really good at doing a lot of things a lot of times. And I, in this pen testing, red teaming world, like, had to constantly keep looking for very specific machines or looking for profiles on machines because I'm hunting for those user profiles that have access to very specific SaaS applications or some kind of identity material that may or may not exist. So being able to, instead focus my energy on the ones that matter instead of just trying to like pick and choose where, machines might exist and what profiles might exist really helps us focus on like, what does this actually mean to the customer and what does this actually mean to achieving objectives? So we have a fictional scenario of, let's say our red team objective is to access a payroll SaaS application. And we have some kind of intel that we found throughout this engagement so far that says that the small council group inside of Active Directory has access to this payroll SaaS. So what we need to do is we're going to start by looking at like, hey, there's the small council group up there. What kind of users are in there, right? And then we look through and we see that, oh, there's no active sessions in the small council group. So, we want to find out who's got a machine that they use on a daily basis, where that machine might exist so we can try and look for specific identity information to access that cloud SaaS. And, it has to be one of these users on this list based on that intel we have. So when there's, 3,000 machines that we have to look for and try and pick and choose where these might exist or might not exist, like doing that by hand is definitely not fun and it's probably not healthy to do either. So you could try and loot everything, but to me that feels a little irresponsible because anytime we are gathering some kind of identity information or credentials or hashes, we as offensive security practitioners need to protect that information so that we can make sure that the customer's confidentiality and integrity are maintained from their perspectives. So, like, sure, you could use Don Pappy, which, you know, just recursively dumps every single secret from a machine, or Hecatome, which really like does that across every machine in the domain. But do you really want to be responsible for that level of credential material for the entire organization? And you'll probably set off a lot of alarms too, where, you know, at least at this point in the red teaming, we want to try and, you know, be stealthy, be quiet, see how we can get to that objective first. So what I built was the ProfileHound collector, where it actually uses Open Graph to spider the $C share on Windows machines. This does require local admin access on those machines. So this is very much a post-escalation tool, and it is that actions on objectives based tool. So the idea is that we connect to the $C share with the local admin access, and then we are spidering for what profiles exist. We're pulling out, you know, what SID they have from the user, and then what SID they have from the machine, and then associating that with the existing BloodHound information that we have, so that all of this really gets tied into the existing nodes that already exist in the BloodHound data, and we're just creating new edges between those nodes with the information that we can use to make informed decisions from that perspective. So this allows us to visually determine what profiles are being used on what machines and which ones are being used the most often, or which ones have like the oldest age or were used the most. So, you know, there's a really good chance that if a profile was created 3 years ago and it was last used yesterday, that might be 3 years of identity information just hidden inside of there, right? So being able to visually look at these new paths with this existing data, nodes, and sources helps us prioritize what we want to look at. So, you know, we ran the ProfileHound, we gathered the information, uploaded it directly into the tool, and now we can see that, like, hey, members of the small council group that have some kind of user profile that was found, this is narrowed down to 2 now. 2 profiles across, you know, like, I think it was 8 users in that small council group and 3,000 machines, right? So now we can look and we can see, hey, Peter Baelish has this user profile on Castle Black. We can see that Cersei Lannister has a user profile on King's Landing, which is a domain controller. We'll keep that out of the equation right now. But, you know, this really helps narrow down already, like, hey, of all these machines, all these users, this is one that's probably pretty interesting for us to focus on now. This is what it looks like running the actual collector itself. You know, we're connecting to machines. We need that either domain admin access or local admin access on the machines. Looks through, gathers, you know, what SIDs are for the specific user accounts that are being profiled, and then associating that information in some of the JSON that we can just drop right into BloodHound itself. But we want to go further, right? Like, sure, this is cool and all. We can see user profiles. We can triage which ones are important. But, like, I want to see exactly what identity material exists inside of those profiles, or what kind of information we can prioritize or categorize as well to go further. So, like, a lot of juicy information is in a lot of profiles, but sometimes we're interested in very specific information too. So things like DP API blobs, so like the browser credentials, long-term session cookies. I'm really interested in very specific browser profiles too that may exist or may not exist. Notepad++ backups, like I can't even begin to tell you how many sysadmins use Notepad++, and then how many put, you know, API keys or some kind of password or something, but it's not saved, right? It's just in that temporary file. But that temporary file in Notepad++ gets saved to disk in your app data directory. So even though you're not clicking that save button, it's still a persistent file, which is why you can open it back up when you log back in or your computer reboots and that information's there. So I've had a lot of success on the red team side of looking through Notepad++ backups. Cloud API tokens, AI authentication, OAuth tokens, all this stuff for, like the coding harnesses that developers are using. There's just so much of this identity information sitting inside of the profile. The real problem is not that we can't get access to it, but there's just so much scale. We have to figure out which ones to prioritize and how do we actually visualize that data. So what I did was extended it even further to look for specific artifacts within profiles. And we can see things like, PowerShell history now, or specific DP API files that existed, the Notepad++ backups, and being able to triage based on the category of file identity artifact, and then exactly where those exist, really helps us focus, like laser in focus on what specific identity artifact we want to pull and why. And then that helps, us make sure that we're doing this work in a responsible way, and we're also doing it in a effective way so that we can continue to really try to get our hands on those objectives. Questions? Yep, so the question was, can we supply a custom regex pattern to look for artifact files? Right, I think right now the first iteration of this, no, but that is something I was planning on extending further to allow that kind of thing to be used. It was like a really easily modifiable kind of JSON schema for the types of files it's looking for. But I definitely wanted to extend that a bit further so it's easier to look for specific regex information. But yeah, great question, thank you. So, really, I think we covered this a few times, but the win is focusing on exactly where we want to loot information, not just looting everything. So, being able to use this as an operator for a red team allows us to really triage profiles and target who we're looking at and why, and then prove impact so that we can actually prove the objectives. And then on the defender side, if we use this tool, it really helps us inventory that identity residue. So, when as sysadmins, as blue teamers, if we offload a user because they're leaving the organization, how many times do you go into all of their SaaS applications and make sure that those accounts are deactivated too? Probably not a whole lot, right? So that gets into the whole identity perspective too of, hey, sure, this user's disabled in Active Directory locally, but that HR application, they might still have access to it. How do we know that that was actually turned off or not if it wasn't connected directly into the IDP for the cloud? So lots of different and interesting scenarios that, again, like Jason said, you don't know unless you actually try and prove it out and show that level of access or not. So as far as using this tool, getting access to it, you can use PipX. If you're not familiar with PipX, I really recommend it because it handles all the dependencies on your own, and you can install it directly in pip if you enjoy dependency hell, but I don't, so I recommend using PipX and getting it directly from PyPy. And I promise there's no malicious source up there yet that I know of. So, really the whole idea is to figure out hey, we'll pull this down, we can run the collector. It doesn't replace the original collector for BloodHound itself. Like, you still need that original data, but it helps build on top of it from that perspective. So as far as getting into a little bit of demo, I'll show some, I'll click around. But again, like the objective we're looking at is we want to prove access to the payroll SaaS. We're in the position of we've already achieved domain admin. So now we just have to figure out, like, how do we translate this domain admin access into logging into the HR payroll SaaS application. And again, our intel shows that there's a small council group that has access to this target application. All right, so let me pull up the, oh boy, where'd it go? Thanks, Windows. Here we go. All right, so if you're not familiar with BloodHound, this is what it looks like when you're actually looking through the data, looking through this information. So what we have here is our small council group. And is this big enough for everyone to read, or at least see mostly what I'm talking about? All right, great, that works. Cool. So yeah, we can see, like, hey, first thing we want to look for is small council group, right? Who's in it? We see there's 7 members, but sadly, there's no sessions right here, right? So when we go further, we can see, okay, like, hey, let's just look at all the domain computers, but oh my goodness, like, do you really want to be going through all of these by hand and figuring out, like, what things might exist, what might not exist, and where? Not really. Nobody wants to do that. So we run our collector, we gather the information, and now we have this new edge called has user profile. And this is one of the ones created by, you know, the ProfileHound tool itself, gets uploaded. And then it also gives this extra metadata showing, like, exactly where the path is, how old the profile is, and when it was last modified. So this gives us some really interesting kind of perspectives of, you know, where some older identity information might be, where it might not be. And then we can even, you know, narrow down the query itself even further, where we're looking for specifically, okay, I want to look for user profiles, but it's for any user that's a member of the small council group. So now we can actually narrow down all that information into these specific targeted profiles that exist on these machines at this point. So this is how we take all of that huge amount of information and then distill it down into specific targets for us to, you know, do it in a manageable sense. Now, when we look at the artifact types themselves, then we can even see further, like, oh man, like, this is something really interesting that I want to focus on, like the Notepad++ backup for this specific user. So Peter Baelish, again, member of the small council group, has a profile on Castle Black. And then within that profile, we also see PowerShell history. We see Notepad++ backups. So then we can actually look down and see exactly where this sample path exists. So we can see it's inside of the profile, app data, roaming, Notepad++, you know, exactly where you would expect it to be based on that legitimate installation of the program. And then actually pull it up and take a peek. And we can see, like, when we remote into it with, you know, something like SMB client, then we can just read the file directly at that point because the user doesn't have to be logged in. The machine's already in. We already have domain admin. We know exactly what artifact we're targeting and exactly where it exists. So we can see, like, oh, hey, it's the file called payledger.demo, which seems to be very closely related to some kind of payroll SaaS. And then, you know, obviously this is demo data, and Codex is, you know, it was really specific that it was not going to put in fake credentials. It was just going to do very explicitly not real credentials when it was building out some of these artifacts. But we can see, like, hey, here's the client secret, here's the token, here's the tenant, and like that just immediate focus on the high value items for being able to prove the access from there. So questions make sense? Yes, great question. And in my experience, they don't do it well. It's almost scary how many of them do not do it very well at all. So um, some of the NDRs, in particular, dark trace, tends to flag that kind of spidering activity pretty well across a bunch of different machines at once. But just kind of vanilla CrowdStrike, Sentinel-1, a lot of those other really big EDRs, without specific tuning, they won't alert on it. It'll be an event. It'll show up in like, here's the things that happened, but it won't bring it to your attention unless you've specifically tuned it to do that kind of thing. So yeah, great question. And like, we're not abusing anything either at this point, right? We're making legitimate SMB connections. We're legitimately looking through folders on the system. Like, there's nothing malicious. We're doing it so we can do malicious things, but like that act in itself is not mean. It's not, bad. So that's some of that whole weak signals kind of part of, there's no exploit, there's no 0-day being thrown, no CVE. Like it's literally just information gathering. But looking at it with that different perspective gives you a, hey, is this specific domain admin really supposed to be spidering every single Windows share on every single machine at 3 a.m.? Probably not. But, you don't know. So, great question. Thank you. Limitation of guardrails, this can be used to really be weaponized, right? And actually cause some harm to individuals. So, it is pretty powerful, and we want to make sure that we are using it in responsible mechanisms. Again, this does require local admin. By default, the profile artifacts, it is just gathering the metadata first. There is a switch to automatically pull down and download, specific types of that artifacts. But again, like, you have to explicitly do that first, because I don't necessarily want that to be done by default for individuals. We don't want to over-collect, because then we're responsible as red teamers and pen testers for the protection of that data and making sure that there's that non-repudiation for the organization as well. And we need to make sure that we can coordinate cleanup of this information and how it gets protected as well. So again, red teamers, we're focused on objectives, improving objectives, not every single path possible. We want to explore the best paths, the things that are the most likely, that are going to be the most impactful, and then actually proving them out so that we can make sure that there are ways to help protect or reduce the impact from those sides. And looking forward, there's always more ways we can use to enhance these types of tools or look for this kind of information. To your point in your question, one thing I want to build into this tool is to try and figure out likely user machines that a user is going to be using instead of spidering just everything at once. So that could be something like reviewing the event logs in the domain controller to look for authentications and who authenticated to what machine, and then building that into which machines we're going to be querying so that we can just query for what machines a specific group has been known to log into in the past. Also things like SCCM data or Azure and Entra ID intel for associated machines, because in those pieces of data, there are actual properties on the machines that show which machine is assigned to which user or not. So being able to gather that data, I feel like would be a good way to help focus on which ones to actually spider at that point, so we're not spidering everything. Usually the less noise, the better in red teaming, until we get to the point that we want to actually try and set off detections on purpose so that we can train how we do these things. And we really want to make sure that we are all working together so that we are all improving the organization, improving the detections, removing legacy identification information, identity information that doesn't need to be there anymore, and really helping to kind of reduce that window so that we can protect the organization in that realistic manner. And again, I'm going to call out the US Cyber Open. It's going to be starting in a few weeks. We are lucky enough to have a bunch of challenges developed by other cyber individuals across the world. Specifically, we got a bunch from Europe and some of the African countries as well. So there's going to be a lot of fun. And the cool part too is that all these challenges are going to be written in their own native language also. So they're not going to be in English. So you're going to have to figure out how to translate them and then use that to actually go in and solve the challenges that they built themselves. So this is getting into some of our initiatives with the US Cyber Games and doing some more international work as well. And these are the dates for that. So again, please register online, take a look at that. I'm building a bunch of challenges too for the competition, which I'm excited. And questions? Any more questions that we haven't answered so far? Another one.
I'm sorry, you said it at least twice, and I just missed it both times. What's the minimum level of permissions needed?
Right now, local admin. So local admin on the machine perspective itself, domain admin just gets inherited at that point. Yep, and that's specifically because we're connecting to that $C share, and you need to have that administrative access in order to be able to spider that remotely. Great. Oh, another question. And is your question prior heuristics on collecting or spidering information on machines, or for the identity on post-collection? Okay, yes.
There are like 1,000 results. How do I know, like, can I have to say first to search, or is there like heuristic?
Yes, yeah, great question. So actually what I've built a few of these searches into it as well. Let me see, so like, let's imagine these are like a couple thousand, right? We built a few in that looks for active user profiles within like the last 3 days or so, right? And then, we can change these Cypher queries to look for like, hey, if someone logged in the last 3 days, there's probably a good chance that it's an active profile, that they've done something with it recently too. So, being able to pull that metadata to look for those things, or, let's say like we want to find profiles that are at least a year old and then logged in within the last 3 days. And members of like some specific group, like that helps us narrow down to exactly which machines are going to be the highest chance of success when we're focusing on how we're trying to pull this information. Did that answer your question? All right, great question. Anyone else? All right, hearing nothing. So thank you so much.